This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
Started to shake violently, not like the rolling, almost soothing motion of previous earthquakes. This was an abrupt heaving and falling that was terrifying in its intensity and duration, threatening to go on forever. For many, the 6.5 quake felt like the big one. Manson's girls would claim later that Charlie himself had brought it down on the sinners tormenting him. Over in Burbank, Martin Scorcese was jolted out of bed. He had just gotten a big break, an editing job at Warner Brothers, and had arrived from New York a few weeks earlier. Marty was staying at the Toluca Motel, across the street from the lot. Dreaming of rare books, when he heard a rumble, he imagined he was in the subway. "I jumped out of bed, looked out the window," he recalls. "Everything was shaking. Lightning was slashing across the sky. It was the electric wires from the telephone poles falling down. It was terrifying. I thought, I gotta get out of here. By the time I pulled on my cowboy boots, got my money and the key to the motel room and made it to the door, it was over. I went to the Copper Penny, and while I was having coffee, there was a big aftershock. I got up to run, and a guy looked at me and said, 'Where are you going to go?' I said, 'You're right. I'm stuck.'" For Scorsese, there was nowhere to run. He had followed his dream to Hollywood, and if it was going to be a bumpier ride than he had imagined, he either had to stick it out or go back to New York, make industrials, live in the old neighborhood, and eat cannoli, always knowing that he hadn't had the stomach for what it took to make it in the movies. Before the dust settled, 65 souls had perished in the quake. None of the people who populate this book was among them. Their injuries would be self-inflicted. For our purposes, the earthquake of 1971 was supererogatory, unnecessary, gilding the lily, as Hollywood has always been wont to do. The real earthquake, the cultural convulsion that upended the film industry, began a decade earlier, when the tectonic plates beneath the back lots began to shift, shattering the verities of the Cold War, the universal fear of the Soviet Union, the paranoia of the Red Scare, the menace of the bomb, freeing a new generation of filmmakers frozen in the ice of 50s conformity. Then came, pell-mell, a series of premonitory shocks: the Civil Rights Movement, the Beatles, the pill, Vietnam, and drugs that combined to shake the studios badly and send the demographic wave that was the baby boom crashing down about them. Because movies are expensive and time-consuming to make, Hollywood is always the last to know, the slowest to respond, and in those years it was at least half a decade behind the other popular arts. So it was some time before the acrid odor of cannabis and tear gas wafted over the pools of Beverly Hills and the sounds of shouting reached the studio gates. But when flower power finally hit in the late 60s, it hit hard. As America burned, Hell's Angels gunned their bikes down Sunset Boulevard, while girls danced topless in the street to the music of the Doors booming from the clubs that lined the Strip. It was like the ground was in flames and tulips were coming up at the same time, recalls Peter Guber, then a trainee at Columbia and later head of Sony Pictures Entertainment. It was one long party. Everything old was bad, everything new was good. Nothing was sacred, everything was up for grabs. It was, in fact, a cultural revolution, American style. By the late 60s and early 70s, if you were young, ambitious, and talented, there was no better place on earth to be than Hollywood. The buzz around movies attracted the best and the brightest of the boomers to the film schools. Everybody wanted to get in on the act. Norman Mailer wanted to make movies more than he wanted to write novels. Andy Warhol wanted to make movies more than he wanted to reproduce Campbell's soup cans. Rock stars like Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger, and the Beatles couldn't wait to get in front of and, in Dylan's case, behind the camera. As Steven Spielberg puts it, the 70s was the first time that a kind of age restriction was lifted, and young people were allowed